Hi, my name is Kathy, and I want to welcome you to Lesson 5 of Prepositions with CINCILINGUA live lessons. If you have any questions while you're watching the lesson, if you're watching live, you can move your mouse around and you'll see this icon that says chat. If you click on chat, it will open a white rectangle, and at the bottom of the rectangle is a place for you to type your questions. And at the end of each lesson, I will answer as many questions as I can. And if we run out of time to answer questions, then I will answer them in the next live lesson. Let's get started with our prepositions for this week. The prepositions for this lesson are two uses of the word by. When we have by with a mode of travel, an example of that is they came by train. Or we can have by with a passive verb. And I'm going to give you some examples and explain to you what a passive verb is. But for right now, we have the example of written by Shakespeare. Around and about. Both around and about, in this case, mean approximately. For example, you could say someone arrived around 7 o'clock. It might have been 6:58. Maybe they came at 7:01. They came around 7 o'clock. And this is a different use of the preposition around. In a previous lesson, we talked about around meaning going in a circle. Like I could put the necklace around my neck, or I could drive my car around the block in a circle. But in this lesson, around and about, both of them are used to mean approximately. For, meaning what is the reason that you did something? You gave a gift, it was for Father's Day. For Father's Day. And this is the part that I hope won't confuse you too much. There are 5 different uses for the word of, the preposition of, in this lesson. Of can mean something that comes from somewhere, like a product of Italy, coming from Italy. Something that contains something, a bowl of popcorn. The bowl contains popcorn. There is popcorn in the bowl. Of meaning relates to. Someone is a teacher of poetry. Their teaching relates to poetry. Something that is made of something, bars of steel. Some of can be used to express a cause, because of the fog. And so I think when you see some pictures and you hear some examples, these 5 different uses for the preposition of will be more clear to you. So the first preposition is by, and the first use of it is to say by with a mode of travel. That means a way of traveling. Sometimes there is so much traffic in the city that is easiest to travel by bicycle. So what is the way that this person is traveling? They are traveling by bicycle. Another way to avoid traffic jams in the city is to go places by subway. This person is traveling how? They are traveling by subway. They're in the subway. Now, it says they are trying to avoid a traffic jam. When there are many, many cars on the road and the cars are moving very slowly, or maybe they're not even moving at all because there are so many cars, perhaps there is an accident. When cars are moving very slowly or when they are not moving at all, we call that a traffic jam. A traffic jam. Sometimes there will be construction and they're working to repair the road, and that can cause traffic to slow down. Sometimes there is an accident on the road and people get backed up behind that accident, and that causes a traffic jam. A traffic jam just means that the cars are moving very slowly, and this person wants to go to their destination quickly. So they decided, since the city has a lot of cars, they will take the subway, and that will be the fastest way to get where they're going. Which do you prefer? Would you like to travel by bus or by car? Would you like to travel by bus or would you like to travel by car? I wish we had time for everyone to share their preferred way of traveling, um, by bus or by car. I want to let you know before we leave this use of the preposition by, you can use this with almost any way to travel somewhere. You can go, it says here, by car, by bus. We've had by subway, by bicycle. You could do by plane. You can say, you could even go by camel. You can go by just about anything. The only one I can think of is, I don't know if it sounds quite right to say you go by foot. Somebody might say you go by foot, but really, if you're walking somewhere, a lot of times we say you go on foot, which is another idiom, which is kind of strange to say that you go on foot. Maybe you can say you go by foot. I'd have to ask some friends to see if they think that that sounds correct or not. It's not very common. It's much more common to say by bus, by train, by car, by plane. Okay, so here is the second use of our idiom. Our preposition, by. We had by for a mode of travel, and now we're going to have by with the passive voice. The passive voice. If we use the active voice, we say a sentence like Shakespeare wrote Romeo and Juliet. And we call this the active voice because Shakespeare is doing an action. The action that Shakespeare is doing is writing. Shakespeare is writing. Shakespeare wrote Romeo and Juliet. Shakespeare is being active and doing something, so we call this active voice. But sometimes, instead of focusing on the author, we want to focus on the thing that was written. And then we will use something called passive voice. And we will say that the play, Romeo and Juliet, was written by Shakespeare. So the play of Romeo and Juliet is not doing anything. It is not doing any action. It was written by Shakespeare. Romeo and Juliet was written by Shakespeare. So for active voice and passive voice, you can try to think, for active voice, someone is doing something to someone or to something. So if I'm doing something to something else, I could write a letter. I could read a book. What am I doing to the book? I'm reading it. I can throw a ball. What am I doing to the ball? I am throwing it. I could do something to a person. I could hug my mom. What am I doing to my mom? I'm giving her a big hug. I could do something to another person. I could say hello to my friend. So I could greet my friend. So when you're having an active voice that can be changed to a passive voice, you tell who is doing the thing and you tell who or what they're doing it to. Then to switch to passive voice, we take whatever that direct object is, the person or the thing that was in the sentence is going to be the focus. Instead of saying I threw the ball, we say the ball was thrown by Kathy. Instead of saying I wrote the letter was written by Kathy. Instead of saying I hugged my mom, you can say that Judy was hugged by Kathy. And so always whoever or whatever it is that is part of the action, that is receiving the action, is called the direct object. And for passive voice, then we talk about here is this thing or this person, and something happened to this thing or something happened to this person. And who was the one that started that? whoever started it, we say by, and then that person. Or maybe it could be an object too. Like if I say that the car hit a tree, the car was driving along and the car hit a tree. I could say the tree was hit by a car, or maybe even the tree was hit by lightning. Lightning struck the tree. The tree was struck by lightning. So anytime that we talk about a person or a thing that had something happen to them, and that person or that thing is the main focus, we will move that person or that thing to the beginning of the sentence. And then at the end of the sentence, we will tell who it was or what it was that did that action. Who hit the tree? The car hit the tree. The tree was hit by the car. Who struck the tree? Lightning struck the tree. The tree was struck by lightning. Okay? So now that you understand passive voice a little bit, we'll move on. Here's another example. The police officer pulled over the speeding driver. When you go very fast in your car, we call that speeding. Speeding. And so this car was speeding, and the police officer stopped the car to give a ticket to the driver because they were going too fast. So to change that to passive voice, we would say the speeding driver was pulled over by the police officer. Who was doing the action here? The police officer was doing the action. Police officer was pulling someone over, so they were pulled over by the police officer. This is the last example of using by with the passive voice. In the active voice, Dr. Alexander Fleming discovered penicillin. Penicillin is a kind of medicine. In the passive voice, penicillin was discovered by Dr. Alexander Fleming. Now we're moving on to the next prepositions. These prepositions are around and about. Both of them can be used to mean approximately. I'm not going to tell you the exact number, but I'm going to give a good guess. We expect around 250 parents to come to school for the choir concert. Or maybe we're trying to decide how many chairs should we set up. Or maybe we're trying to figure out if we make some copies of the names of all of the songs and the names of all of the people singing, and we want to know how many pieces of paper will we need. We need to guess how many people are coming. So we say, oh, I don't know the exact number, but I think around 250 parents are coming. Or instead of around, we could say about. I think we expect about 250 parents to come. We expect about 250 parents to come to the school for the choir concert. Not an exact number, but kind of close, about 250. So here, someone is baking cookies, and it says, I don't have an exact recipe, but I would guess that it is best to bake the cookies for around 12 minutes until they're brown. Maybe 11 minutes, maybe 13 minutes, but somewhere around 12 minutes until they're brown. So we could use around, or we could use about. I don't have an exact recipe, but I guess it would be best to bake the cookies for about 12 minutes. About 12 minutes until they're brown. Excuse me. Okay, so the next preposition that we have is for. And here, when we use for, we're telling the reason that we're doing something. So this jar here is full of a white powder that's called baking soda. Baking soda. You have to be careful because in America we have something called baking soda and something else called baking powder. And you use baking soda and you use baking powder both when you are making bread or cakes or things that have to rise. And they have slightly different uses. I'm not going to explain all of that right now because it would take too long in the lesson. But do know that if you ever try to go to the store to buy baking soda, make sure that you really want baking soda and not baking powder. At any rate, this jar right here is full of a powder that is called baking soda. And our example says, baking soda has so many uses. It can be used to make baked goods rise, means get bigger. So bread, sometimes you have a flat bread like a tortilla or a flat bread like a naan or something. But if you want your bread to rise, or you want your cake or cookies or something to rise, then you use baking soda. But it says baking soda can also be used for cleaning, for odor removal, and even for whitening teeth. So here are some reasons to use baking soda. Everyone knows, because it is called baking soda, that you're going to use it when you are baking. Baking means to make things like cakes and bread and pies. So we already know we use it for baking, but it says you can also use baking soda for cleaning. You can use baking soda for odor removal. And this is interesting. In America, when you buy, a lot of times baking soda will come, and sometimes the box comes with a special little area, one area that you can open if you want to pour the baking soda out, like you want to pour it maybe into this jar, or you want to scoop some onto a spoon to use in a recipe. But there's a different area that you can use to open the baking soda. And then you put the whole box of baking soda into your refrigerator. And then if you have anything like onions in your refrigerator or something else that has a very strong odor, a strong smell, the baking soda will absorb, will soak in the smell and take the smell away from the refrigerator. So it can be used for odor removal, and it can even be used for whitening teeth. So you might see some toothpaste that says that it contains baking soda, because baking soda can be used for whitening teeth. So in this page here, we have the preposition for and many different examples of how we're going to use for to talk about the reasons for something. Sorry. Here we go. Here's another example with for. After you use a box for packing things, your child can use the box for creating a fort. So over here, these boxes are for packaging things, from packing things up to mail them. And after they arrive and you take things out of them, now you have an empty box. Your child can use the empty box for a fort. A fort is like a little pretend house or a little pretend castle that the child can sit in and play in to have a good time. So I don't know if you ever have created a fort at your house. Some people use a box to make a fort. You could use a blanket to make a fort. There's so many different ways you can use your imagination to build a fort. But the reasons for these boxes are for packaging things or packing things, and for creating a fort. That's the reason. Now, here we are beginning the examples with the preposition of. And I told you there were 5 different ways that we can use of as a preposition. And I did not give a lot of examples of each one because I thought it might be a little bit confusing. I'm going to give you one example of each one, and we will just see how you're doing. Again, remember that it's possible for you to ask questions at the end of the lesson. And if you have a question about one of these uses for of, then you can type it into the chat. So this meaning for of means comes from. Something comes from a place. I think that the olive oil of Spain has the best flavor. So this olive oil, this particular kind of olive oil, comes from Spain. All olive oil, the olives are grown in some country. So every kind of olive oil comes from somewhere. And this particular brand of olive oil is from Spain. So this is the olive oil of Spain. Of Spain, meaning from Spain. Of meaning contains. We like to share a bowl of popcorn while we watch television. The bowl contains popcorn. There is popcorn inside the bowl. You could have a bowl of popcorn, a bowl of soup, a bowl of ice cream, whatever is inside that bowl. Or you could have a car full of people. You could have a classroom of students. The classroom is full of students. There are students inside of the classroom. It contains students. Can have a basket of something. You could have anything that can contain something else. It doesn't have to be a bowl, but something that can contain other items. And then you say of, and then you tell what it is that that container has in it. So just trying to think of a few other examples. You could have a plate of spaghetti. That plate is containing or having on it some spaghetti. You could have a book of poems, and inside of the book, there are all kinds of poems. So this is of meaning contains, talking about what is in something. The next one is of, meaning relates to. Let me go back for just a minute here. This kind of, where we were talking about a place, when we said olive oil of Spain, if I said this to other Americans, they would understand what I mean, but it's not very common. I think it would be more common for me to say Spanish olive oil. Instead of saying that it comes from Spain, I would say that it is Spanish olive oil. Or if something comes from Italy, instead of saying it's of Italy, it would be more common for me to say Italian. For example, pasta of Italy. The Italian pasta would be more common. This next use for of, saying that something contains something, this is very common. We use this a lot to talk about something that is in something else. This one we use very often. This next one that I was starting to share with you, this one also is not very common. It says relates to. Someone who has a PhD is not a medical doctor, but a doctor of philosophy. So the PhD, the PH part stands for philosophy, and the D stands for doctor. So let's pretend, for example, that this person's name is Smith, and we, instead of calling him Mr. Smith, we would call him Dr. Smith. Someone might be confused and think, oh, Dr. Smith, I'm feeling sick. Can I ask Dr. Smith a question and maybe Dr. Smith can help me to feel better? No, Dr. Smith is not a medical doctor. He is a doctor of philosophy. That means that that's the very highest kind of university degree that you can get. You can go for 4 years and get a bachelor's degree. You can stay for an extra year or two to get a master's degree. And if you stay even longer than that, the very highest university degree that someone can get is a doctorate or a doctoral degree. And so if you are someone who has a doctor's degree in philosophy, then you have a PhD. And philosophy, do you know what philosophy means? Philosophy is kind of thinking about thinking. Socrates was a famous person who who talked about philosophy. Anyway, if you are a doctor of philosophy, that means that your kind of doctoring relates to philosophy. Your degree from the university relates to philosophy, meaning that that is what the subject that you are an expert in. Okay, here is a fourth. We had of meaning from a place. We had of meaning containing something. We had of meaning relating to. Here's a fourth one. Of can be made of. The bars of steel are so strong that they will last for years. The bars of steel. And so these things that are long and thin are very strong. They are bars made out of steel. They're bars of steel. And again, this one, it kind of depends. There are certain things like maybe bars of steel where we would use of more often, but it's also possible for us to just say the steel bars instead of saying the bars of steel. Or I could say the house of wood, or I could just say the wooden house. The wooden house, wood with en, wooden, the wooden house, or the brick house, the house of bricks. If a house is made of bricks, it is a brick house or a house of bricks. So this kind of, sometimes we use it, sometimes we don't. Again, you could have a house of bricks or just a brick house. You could have bars of steel or just steel bars. But when you have bars of steel, it means that the bars are made from steel. When you have a house of bricks, it means that the house is made with bricks. And here is our last use of the preposition of, and it says expressing cause, expressing cause. Driving was very difficult because of the fog. Why was it difficult? It was difficult because of the fog. And you can see here, it looks a little bit like there are some clouds that are up in the sky that have come down, and that those clouds are near the ground. That is called fog. That kind of weather where it's very difficult to see is called fog. And when you look at the picture, you can see a car here, and in front of the car, you can almost see it's either a truck or a bus. Some large vehicle is here, but it's really hard to see what it is. And why is it hard to see? It's difficult to see because of the fog, because of the fog. And so when we're answering the question, why is it hard? We're going to tell the reason, the cause of this thing. Why was it difficult to drive? It was difficult to drive because of the fog. Why did I lose my money? I lost my money because of the hole in my pocket. If I put my money in my pocket, but there is a hole in the pocket that the money can just go right out through that hole, then I lost it because of the hole in my pocket. So that's the use of in that situation. Let's look at the review here. So we talked about by with a mode of travel. Talked about by with passive verb. And a passive verb is one where instead of saying who did the action, we're talking about the thing or the person that received that action. For example, the book was read by, the letter was written by, the ball was thrown by. Those are all passive verbs instead of the active verb, the basketball player threw the ball. That's telling who did the action. That's active voice. Paul read the book. Who's reading the book? Paul is. So that's active voice. But the book was read by Paul, makes it passive voice. Around, about, approximately. I'm making a guess. It was close to this time or close to this number. For, telling a reason. All of the reasons that we had for using baking soda or making a fort from a box. The box was used for a fort, or the box could be used for sending something to someone. Of, we had 5 different ways that we were using the preposition of to tell where something comes from, to tell what something contains, to tell what something relates to, what it is made of, or expressing cause. Let me show you the examples for those. So if something comes from somewhere, it can be a product of Italy. A product of Italy. And I think a product of is probably the most common way that we use the word of with the word product. A product of, and then you tell where it's from, which country it's from. Contains a bowl of popcorn. What is in the bowl? The bowl has popcorn in it. So it contains popcorn. Relates to. We talked about having a doctor of philosophy because his degree relates to philosophy, or a book of poems. The book is relating to poetry. What is something made of? Bars of steel. All of those bars that we saw in the picture are made out of steel. Or we could have a brick house, a house that is made of bricks, or a wooden house, a house of wood. And then expressing cause. Why is something happening? Because of the fog, because of. And before we end today, I want to answer a question. If you're curious about, I had asked you about your favorite mode of travel. You travel by something. And if you ask me what is my favorite mode of travel, do I prefer to go in a bus or do I prefer to go in a car? And I would have to say I prefer both for different reasons. I like to ride in a bus because I think the bus is better for the environment. I think it makes less pollution. I think that it is saving money. I think that it is really, really a good choice. But in America, we just don't have a lot of buses. And the buses that we do have make many, many stops. And so sometimes if I could drive somewhere, I can get there in 20 minutes. If I take the bus, it will take me an hour. And so that's kind of a drawback. Or if I want to travel from one city to another city, sometimes it's really difficult to find buses that go from one city to another. Often we have buses that go around inside of a city, but to go from one city to another, sometimes it's hard to find. And so if I want to travel from one city to another, even though I think the bus is better for the environment, often I think I would say in that case, I prefer a car because I can go where I want to go, and otherwise it might be impossible to go. There might not be a bus that goes where I want to go. Either that, or maybe I would have to go, if I want to go from here to here, instead of just going in a straight line, I might have to take a bus from here up here and then down to get where I'm going. And that would be kind of a waste of money, a waste of time. So do I prefer to go by bus or by car? I prefer both for different reasons. All right. I just want to thank you so much for joining me today. And I hope that I'm going to see you at the next lesson for prepositions with CINCILINGUA. Thank you, and I hope you have a great evening.